The man who created Iron Maiden, the engine behind one of the greatest metal bands in history, turns 70 today!
Happy birthday to you!
And while Steve Harris is often praised as a visionary songwriter, a band leader, and the architect of the Iron Maiden sound, today let's talk about something slightly more specific. What actually makes his bass sound so unique. Because yes, Steve Harris was one of the people who redefined what bass guitar could do in heavy metal. Here you go. But before we start, the most important thing, happy birthday, Steve! Thank you so much for the years of incredible music, for developing and creating one of the greatest heavy metal bands on the planet, and for even today, 51 years later, still rocking the stages all across the world. I know that there's a high chance that you'll be watching this episode, so on behalf of all the metal pilgrims around the world, have the best day ever, boss. We all know Steve Harris is one of the most iconic bass players in heavy metal history. But in reality, bass was not the first instrument he was actually drawn to. Now, pretty much every Iron Maiden fan knows that in his early teens, Steve was simply obsessed with football and dreamed about becoming a professional player for West Ham United. And he actually almost did.
West Ham was my first proper game, so that was that.
And music actually did come for Steve slightly later, when he discovered bands like Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Jethro Tull, and Genesis, and suddenly realized that this was something that he wanted to pursue seriously. But in the beginning, Steve Harris actually dreamt about becoming a drummer, simply because he loved the power and the beat of that instrument. Yet there was a slight problem. He simply did not have enough space to put the entire drum kit to practice on. And in addition to that, drumming also required quite a lot of complex coordination and combinations in brain, which back in the day Steve Harris thought he was too sensible for, which resulted in him eventually having to settle for the second best option.
I just thought, if I can't play drums, then I'll play along with the drums rhythmically.
And so back in the day, Steve Harris thought that if he cannot play the drums, he should at least play with the drums. And we all know that there is simply no better instrument to do so than bass guitar. But interestingly enough, it wasn't the first instrument Steve Harris picked up back in the day, as at first he actually experimented with the acoustic guitar, but very quickly became frustrated with it, and as Steve Harris himself later on recalled, he simply learned a couple of chords, tried to play along with the songs, and quickly felt that it simply wasn't taking him where he wanted to go musically, resulting in him swiftly changing to the lower end of the sound, and by the age of 17, Steve was able to purchase his very first bass guitar, a Shavsbury copy of Fender Precision Bass, and from that moment on, the direction of his musical life was essentially decided, and the history of the entire genre would eventually be reshaped. When people talk about Steve Harris's bass playing, one of the things that instantly comes up is of course his unique tone, and the famous metallic clank that you can hear in many Iron Maiden songs, which of course comes from a combination of very specific choices in both technique and the setup. Pretty much every Iron Maiden fan knows that Steve plays with very low string action, which means the strings sit extremely close to the frets, which means that when he attacks the strings with his fingers, the strings hit the frets, producing that characteristic clanking sound. At the same time, he uses heavy flat-wound strings and boosts the mid-range and treble frequencies while keeping the low end relatively controlled. And that's exactly what allows his bass to cut through Iron Maiden's dense twin guitar sound. And instantly enough, he actually decided to go a completely different route from his lifelong friend and his counterpart at Judas Priest, who, as we all know, back in the late 70s, faced exactly the same problem of trying to cut through the heavy guitar sound of the metal gods. Yet unlike Ian Hill, who decided to sacrifice what was natural for him and started playing bass with a pick back in 1980, which for the record, even today, 46 years later, still feels unnatural to Ian.
I did what was right, basically, for the song rather than me.
Steve Harris decided to tackle the same problem with what Nico McBrain describes as tickling of the strings, maintaining the crazy speed of Iron Maiden songs by playing with just his two fingers, and never a pick.
No, it's just 2 fingers. A lot of people think it's 3 or 4 fingers, but you know, it's just the 2.
You see, this is a steering wheel, mate.
And that technique, of course, relates to another element which makes Steve Harris's bass playing instantly identifiable: the famous galloping bass rhythm, which you can hear in pretty much every popular Iron Maiden song. And which in fact is rather simple, as it is based on a pattern of 1/8 note followed by 2/16 notes, creating that distinctive pulse that feels like a horse galloping forward, and which, in all honesty, even by the time when Iron Maiden were just starting out, wasn't really a new thing for the world of heavy metal. Because, you know, well, that band existed.
Don't believe a word.
But what makes Harris special, once again, is the way he executes it, as instead of using 3 fingers, which would make the pattern mechanically easier, Steve famously performs it using only 2 fingers, alternating rapidly while maintaining that uneven rhythmic accent.
Riding through dust clouds and barren wastes, galloping hard on the plains.
And of course, it is that bass galloping rhythm that fills the space between the drum beats, creating the wall of sound and developing a feeling of a constant move forward, as it is when you combine that galloping bass with Iron Maiden's twin guitar harmonies and Nick McBrain's drumming, you get that unstoppable forward momentum that, yes, was popularized by Iron Maiden, led by Steve Harris, and did become one of the defining sounds of the entire new wave of British heavy metal movement. The most important of the unimportant facts we're discussing here is the fact that Steve Harris's bass playing is actually by far not only about the rhythm, as another defining aspect of his style is how he constructs bass lines around the harmonic structures of the song, rather than simply doubling the guitar like most other bassists do. Yet before we go into that territory, I'd like to point out that there is a popular misconception that Steve Harris is supposedly completely against root note playing, when in reality it's not exactly true, and Steve, being a leader of Iron Maiden, always does what is best for the band. Very often, Steve will anchor the music by repeating a pedal root note, frequently on the open E or A string, while the guitars move through harmonized melodies above it. And a great example of this approach can be heard in Ace's High, when the bass drives the rhythm by constantly hammering the root note, almost like an engine of a fighter plane, while the guitars perform the melodic lines around it. But the craziest thing is that sometimes it actually works the other way around, as in many Iron Maiden songs, it is actually the bass that is leading the melodies at parts. And Steve Harris is actually also known for frequently building riffs around intervals like the minor 3rd, 5th, and minor 7ths, which contributes to the dramatic, heroic quality that many Maiden songs have. Like, for example, in Run to the Hills, when in the chorus you can hear how the switching between root and 8th with the 7th in between create the epic feeling that contributes to the whole entourage of the song. And this is when we come to the most important of the least important aspects of his playing. As in my opinion, the most important thing Steve Harris did for heavy metal bass playing was expand its role beyond simple rhythm support. As yes, in many bands, the bass sits quietly behind the guitars, reinforcing the root notes and keeping the groove together, like in some Iron Maiden songs, whenever it works. But at the same time, in many Iron Maiden songs, bass actually becomes the lead instrument, shaping the entire atmosphere of the tune. Listen to the opening of The Clairvoyant. The track begins with a melodic bass line that immediately establishes both the tempo and the emotional tone of the song. Or the atmospheric middle section of Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, where the bass contributes to that eerie, mystical atmosphere while Bruce Dickinson delivers the spoken narration. Or the famous bass arpeggios and strumming in the beginning of The Fear of the Dark. Dance of Death, where the bass guitar creates tension and mood long before the full band explodes into action. And that list can go on and on and on. As for Iron Maiden, bass does not support the music, it paints it as a vivid picture. But in reality, if we're being very honest, none of the aspects mentioned above are even that important. As yes, in the modern world, there are actually way more advanced bass players than Steve Harris. And some of the internet sensations on YouTube are actually more advanced than pretty much any superstar from the world of heavy metal. And yet it is Steve Harris who, while being 70 years old this year, still gathers stadiums around the world. And the secret to that success is nothing else but passion. Watching Steve Harris run around the stage with Iron Maiden is one of the most entertaining and one of the most mesmerizing experiences for every metalhead around the world. As right from the opening notes of every concert, it becomes absolutely clear that Steve Harris lives every single second of this band.
The coast to go across the seven seas.
I don't know any other non-vocalist bassist in the world of metal who would literally scream from the top of his lung every word of every song he performs live. And I mean it! I actually played a little game at one of the Iron Maiden concerts I attended in the past and tried to catch Steve Harris miss at least one word of a song from a setlist. I lost! And even during the songs he has played literally thousands of times, you can see that same intensity in his face. As the truth is that Steve is not really a performer, meaning he does not only perform music, but he lives it. And for almost 50 years, Steve Harris has dedicated his entire life to Iron Maiden. He built the band from nothing in East London pubs, fought through lineup changes, industry pressures and changing musical trends, which sometimes required him making rather uncomfortable choices. Yet through all of that, he never stopped believing in the identity of the band he created. And this, my friends, is something that all of us metalheads can truly feel in every note of this band. As in the age of crazy technicality, in the age of AI and artificially flavored music, Steve Harris has always remained true to himself, his music, and his loyal, diehard fans. And this is what really makes him one of the most legendary musicians in the world of heavy metal. But anyways, what is your favorite bass line by Steve Harris? Please let us know in the comments. But most importantly, let's all wish Steve the best freaking day ever today. As come on, without him, the world of metal would never have been the same. So happy birthday, Steve. Thank you so much for watching the short video, guys, and we will prevail. Slava Ukraini!